Coming into in the end of spring, roughly, we have about a month left, roughly again. But as we get into the summer season and then into the fall planting season, these are the 3 top things to focus on in your garden to keep it producing, productive, and primed and ready for the next season. I know how some people like to twist my words, and let me be very clear about this. These are not the only 3 things that I focus on, but in my garden this time of the year, these are the 3 things that I really put a lot of weight into the decisions that I make to make my garden the best it can possibly be. So the first one is, and by the way, these are all going to be multi-tiered. So the first one is fertilizing. So don't click off because you don't use fertilizer. I get it. But what I'm saying is fertilizing, feeding, long-term, short-term, quick bursts, all that stuff. Use that to your advantage. Ever driven down the road and notice that you don't see a squash plant growing on the side of the road necessarily? Have you ever seen a tomato plant growing on the side of the road? No, it's not a common occurrence. Yes, it can possibly happen at the right time of year, but what I'm saying is these are not native plants to our area. So not only that, but we have to keep feeding our soil to keep growing in them, right? So for instance, this bed right here, the plan for it right now is to be squash. Then we'll pull the squash out, we'll put more squash in, and then we're gonna come back and we're probably gonna put rutabagas or turnips behind it. So you see, and those, if we do rutabagas, they can go all the way up until January, and then we'll replant it in February. So you can see these beds get pushed really hard. I can hear the clickety clack of the keyboard and people saying, well, you need to let your beds rest. Well, in fact, I do let them rest, but I let them rest in different periods. So we want to keep feeding our gardens, especially throughout the season, because we're just depleting that soil. So what does that look like? Well, obviously it looks like putting fertilizer down. And as far as when I say fertilizer, I mean actual fertilizer that you buy, like a 10-10-10, something like that. If you're growing something that's very nitrogen hungry, you want to put a 45-00 in, something like that. And I don't think that compost is fertilizer. I think it is an amazing amendment, but it's part of your long-term plan. So it's no secret that I am going to be mulching my beds very soon. And when we mulch our beds, what we want to do is we want to start that process, right? So we want to start putting our long-term fertilizer in. So what can that look like? Well, let's use, this bed's easy to look at. Actually, we're tired of looking at this bed. Come over here and let's look at this bed. What do you say? So what we'll do is we may put a layer of compost down if I've got some ready. I'm kind of not been in like super compost making mode lately, but we will put the alfalfa pellets down and we'll coat the top of the soil with that, and then we'll mulch on top of that. And as that breaks down, that will refeed the soil to an extent. Not to mention the mulch will feed, and not to mention before we put the mulch down, we're also going to put another layer of granular organic fertilizer down to continue feeding throughout the garden season. So that will keep this garden bed primed for the next planting into the year. You can see we're hitting it on multiple angles. We're putting the fertilizer down, we're putting the alfalfa pellets down, long-term fertilizer, short-term. Well, organic fertilizer is medium-term. Alfalfa pellets are long-term, compost is long-term, mulch is long-term. And then in between, what we'll do is we'll also, in our injection system, be fertilizing, which is short-term feeding. And so all of that will start priming these beds to feed these plants. And then on top of that, feed the next generation of plants, the next season, and so on and so forth. So we always want to be doing something like that. Now, I don't mean come out here every day and put fertilizer down, get some kind of regimen going for yourself. I put mine down about once a month, and then in the height of production, I will drip feed every other week to every 3 weeks, something like that. And then go from there. But one thing we do know about nutrition is the nitrogen is water soluble and it will leach out of your garden. So that is what we want to focus on. And that's why we're putting those alfalfa pellets in. Now the second one, has come to my attention over the years and through witnessing, and this is a particularly hungry crop for water. Water, water, water. Water is super important for your garden. And my thorough belief is, as a community, gardeners do not water their plants enough. We depend too much on rain. So, I wanted to let the Lord water the garden for me, and I do welcome the rain, and I'm very happy to see it. But if we depend on that up there to always give us water, we're going to have a serious issue. Now, I've seen this time and time again. Quick story. We went out of town, spring season. I hate going out of town spring season, not doing it anymore. That's different. But we pre-watered and I saturated the soil because I was paranoid, right? And I was like, whatever, if something breaks, something doesn't work, then it'll be fine. Well, while we were gone, we got torrential downpours on top of that. And I remember being gone thinking, great, the garden's gonna be ruined, absolutely ruined. Now I know this potato bed's about toast, but when I came back, and this is a couple years ago, my potato bed had quadrupled in growth in a week. Same with my squashes, same with my tomatoes, just everything across the board. The garden looked like a completely different place in 1 week than I had ever realized. Now, I do believe this was a perfect storm scenario where we had lots and lots of water. I think our fertilizer was starting to kick in at the same time, and that water just propelled it into motion, and it really pushed it off. But ever since then, I have been really heavy-handed with the water and not overly concerned about doing anything else as far as conserving too much water. I mean, look, note about conserving water. I don't water my grass ever, 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 ever. The only time I water my flower beds is when they're getting established, which is probably why they don't do as well as they should. But I do not really hold back for my food because this is our main production. This is more important. Flowers are nice, they're pretty, they do the job. But when it comes down to it, what we really, really want is we want to have our food production. So we don't really hold back a whole lot. We haven't seen exorbitant costs in the cost of water monthly. What cost us more was a toilet leaking than watering our garden. So you can do with it what you want, but water, 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 water. So what I do, as of right now, we're not excessively hot. So every 3 days, these beds get 90 minutes of drip irrigation. Then once it starts getting hot, we'll go to every other day for about 70 minutes. They'll get it, whether it rains or not. We don't even cut them off anymore because we just think, hey, it's extra water. Great. Now, if we get a hurricane and we get 10 inches of rain, we'll cut off our water. But other than that, we're good. We just keep it running. And ever since we've done that, we've seen the best growth ever in our garden. Fertilizer regimen did change, and that does help. I'm not going to deny that. But what we know about water is, one, it hydrates the plants, and two, it helps move that nutrition amongst the root systems, throughout the roots, all that stuff. If you're using organic fertilizer, you have to have the water in order for it to break down to start to work. So you get the drift, the gist, right? It's all got to work. You got to have water. So I would suggest watering more this season. This bed right here, rain will water it a lot better than this bed right here. Why is that? Because as the rain falls and hits the leaves, it gets dispersed off of it, and it doesn't actually hit the ground appropriately. So that's why when you see spacing requirements and stuff like that, you'll see a couple feet in between rows. That's why. Now, as this bed starts to grow and the corn gets taller and taller and fills up more space in the bed, you're going to see that that soil is not going to get as damp. That's why we don't depend on the rain. So you hear me talk about this a lot. And when I say a lot, I mean a lot, and I'm going to continue to talk about it, but there's multiple things about it this time of year, and that's your timing. Your timing is very, very important, and it's not just for planting. So yes, planting is very important. It definitely helps when you're planting, you know, for fall. You don't want to plant it in June You want to plant it closer to the season. You want to time it out, all that stuff. So it absolutely does make a difference. But our timing is important for not only planting, but feeding, harvesting, and all that good stuff. It all makes a big difference. So with that being said, harvesting timing. So this plant right here is a determinate tomato, okay? It's gonna produce a certain amount in a certain amount of time. But if we pull the tomatoes before they are absolutely perfect on here, maybe they just have like a slight green blush on them. Like they're mostly red, but they're still a little bit green. I don't think I use the word blushing right. Then you will possibly get more tomatoes. It's just a theory of mine, but it works for cucumbers. I know for a fact it works for watermelons. Well, not really watermelons. You got to wait for them to ripen. But sometimes we want to get them a little bit earlier and ripen them in our house. Absolutely it'll work for peppers and stuff like that. Eggplants, kind of. You really want them to get to the right size. For sure, squashes, you don't want them to get too big. So, you know, a slightly immature squash is going to be better than an over mature squash. And then that will signal to the plant, hey, we didn't let our seed drop. We need to grow more. The plant's job is just to pass genetics along through seed. So therefore, we want to pull that off, keep that plant going, and signal to that plant, hey, nope, got to make more, got to do more. Let's keep growing, let's keep growing. And that's how you keep them going. Green beans are good for that. You know, if you let them get overly mature, then they will slow down their production, and then you go through and you harvest them all and you'll get another flush. The snow peas back here on this trellis, they're really bad about that. If you let them get too big, it will actually stop producing and start dying from the bottom up, which we are at risk for now, which I'm okay with. But you know, across the board, these are things that we want to do. So timing for that is important, as well as fertilizing. Timing your fertilizers out is really important too. We don't want to over fertilize this bed at this point because it is getting close to producing, to harvest time. So we want to start to slow down the fertilization on here. We're not pumping a lot of nutrients in, and we just want to keep it going. Now, once we harvest it, we want to go ahead and re-fertilize it, let that fertilizer start to break down, charge that soil, and then replant this bed. And that's how we can do it. Now, when you come to this bed over here, where we just planted this row of peppers, we pre-fertilize it for the planting. So the pre-plant or the planting fertilizer, put that in, and that was timing it out for that. So all of that will work. Same thing here. These are all going to be bush beans. We put them in. Now we put fertilizer on top as well. So by the time it starts to break down, because it is a granular organic fertilizer, and they will start to need that fertilizer, and that will start to break down. But we already had rutabagas in here that used up a portion of the fertilizer. So you can see that we want to time all of that out in order to get it to go just right. I don't need to say you need to time out your seed starting and all that. We know that at this point. We've figured that out, and we will get back to that when the time is right. But right now, we just want to focus on timing everything else out appropriately. So you can see it's really important to hit these three, I guess you can call them tenets of the main. This is the main season. From end of spring to beginning of fall is the main gardening season, and these are the three things you need to hit on. Now, if there's anything you guys focus on, let me know in the comments. Let us all know in the comments, because I would be interested to see. And if you think you're going to adjust in any way, which you do, then definitely look at that. But just keep in mind, if we do our timing, our fertilizing, and our watering, you got a really good recipe of staying on track. Now, real quick for timing, that includes your pest control and all that stuff. All that factors in, and we'll get into that in another video, so don't worry about that. But all of this stuff will add up, and it will improve your garden dramatically.